She never had a choice. Forced to marry a man old enough to be her father, Aisha's dreams of love and happiness faded the moment she became his wife. But fate is unpredictable. A single moment, an unexpected twist, and everything she thought was written in stone began to change. Could destiny have something greater in store for her? The room was filled with guests, the scent of rosewater lingering in the air, and the sound of soft drums echoing in the background. Laughter and whispered conversations surrounded Aisha, but she felt like a stranger in her own wedding. The gold embroidery on her bridal dress shimmered under the candlelight, but to her it felt like the weight of chains. Her hands trembled in her lap, covered in intricate henna designs, as she stole a glance at the man beside her, her husband. He was old enough to be her father, his beard streaked with gray, his face weathered by time. His hands, though adorned with rings, were rough from years of work. When he looked at her, there was no warmth, only quiet satisfaction, as if he had gained another possession rather than a wife. Aisha felt the walls closing in around her. She had begged her father to reconsider, pleaded with her mother to intervene, but their decision had been final. "You will be taken care of," her father had said. "He is wealthy, respected. This is what's best for you." But what of her dreams? What of the love she had longed for? None of that had mattered. That night, as she was led to her husband's home, her heart pounded with fear. The house was grand, adorned with fine carpets and heavy chandeliers, but it felt hollow. Servants moved quietly through the halls, avoiding her gaze. It was clear that she was not the first young bride to step into this house. When they were finally alone, her husband sat across from her, studying her with calm eyes. "You will learn your duties in time," he said. "Obedience and patience will serve you well." She wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But she merely nodded, lowering her gaze. Days turned into weeks, and Aisha's life became routine. She woke early, dressed in the finest silks, and fulfilled the role expected of her. She spoke little, learned to read his moods, and did as she was told. The house was large, yet it suffocated her. She often sat by the window, watching the world outside, the children playing in the streets, the women laughing at the market, the young couples who walked together, hand in hand. A life she would never have. Her husband was not cruel, but he was distant. To him, she was a duty fulfilled, nothing more. There were no tender words, no stolen glances filled with affection. Nights passed in silence, and mornings greeted her with emptiness. The loneliness gnawed at her, but she buried it deep, knowing that no one would listen. One evening, as she walked through the courtyard, she saw an old servant woman watching her. Unlike the others, she did not lower her gaze or walk away. Instead, she offered a sad smile. "You remind me of someone," the woman said softly. Aisha hesitated. "Who?" The servant sighed. "His first wife. She was young too. Full of dreams." A chill ran through Aisha's spine. "What happened to her?" The woman hesitated before whispering, "She disappeared." Aisha's breath caught in her throat. "Disappeared." The woman nodded, her voice barely audible. "One night, she was gone. No one spoke of her again." Aisha's heart pounded. Was this her future? Would she become another forgotten name, lost to the silence of this house? That night, as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a thought crept into her mind, one she had never dared to entertain before. She could not live like this forever. Somewhere beyond these walls, a different life awaited. But did she have the courage to find it? The weight of her new life pressed down on Aisha with each passing day. The grand house, filled with priceless treasures and fine silks, was nothing more than a prison. The silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional orders from her husband or the quiet movements of the servants. She longed for escape, but where could she go? Her father had made it clear, this was her destiny, and there was no turning back. One afternoon, as she sat in the courtyard, a soft breeze brushing against her face, she heard a commotion near the gates. The voice of a young man carried through the air, firm yet respectful. "These goods were requested for the master of the house," he said. Aisha turned slightly, her gaze falling on a man standing by the entrance. He was dressed in simple clothes, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong arms. His dark eyes held quiet determination as he spoke to the gatekeeper, who inspected the sacks of grain and spices he had delivered. She wasn't sure why she kept watching, but something about him felt different. The gatekeeper nodded, allowing him inside. As he passed through the courtyard, his eyes briefly met hers. It was only a moment, but in that fleeting glance, she saw something she had not seen in a long time: kindness. Aisha quickly turned away, her heart pounding. She shouldn't be looking at him. He was just a tradesman, a stranger, someone who had no place in her world. And yet, for the first time since her marriage, she felt something stir inside her, a reminder that she was still alive. Days passed, and the tradesman, whose name she learned was Zion, became a familiar presence. He often came to deliver goods, exchanging words with the servants, moving effortlessly through the home that felt like a cage to her. One day, as she walked through the market with one of the older servant women, she saw him again. He was speaking with a merchant, haggling over prices with ease. She tried to ignore him, but he noticed her. "Aisha, isn't it?" His voice was steady, but there was no disrespect in it. She hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else had heard. "How do you know my name?" He smiled slightly. "People talk." Her hands clenched around the folds of her dress. "They shouldn't." His expression softened. "I meant no harm. I see you in that house, always quiet, always alone." She swallowed. "That is how it should be." Zion studied her for a moment before speaking again. "Is it?" Aisha looked away, unsure how to answer. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. Not her father, not her husband, not even the servants who saw her every day. "You deserve more than silence," Zion said softly. His words unsettled her. She had spent so long convincing herself that this was her fate, that there was no escape. But in that moment she wondered, was he right? Their meetings were brief, always in passing, never inappropriate, but each time she saw him, something inside her shifted. He never overstepped, never said too much, but the concern in his eyes spoke volumes. One evening, as she sat in the garden alone, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Zion standing at a distance, holding a small package. "I brought this for you," he said. She hesitated before reaching out. Inside was a simple wooden carving of a bird, delicate and beautifully crafted. "What is this?" she whispered. "A symbol of freedom," he said. "To remind you that cages can be broken." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever given her something so small yet so meaningful. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I cannot leave. I have no choice." Zion's gaze was steady. "There is always a choice, Aisha. Sometimes, we just need the courage to take it." Her heart pounded as she clutched the wooden bird tightly. Could she truly dare to dream of something beyond these walls? For the first time since her wedding, a sliver of hope entered her heart. Perhaps fate had not abandoned her after all. Aisha could no longer ignore the unease growing inside her. Zion's words had planted a seed in her heart, but it was something else that troubled her, the whispers of the past. The first wife. She had barely thought about it before, but now it haunted her. Who was she? What had happened to her? The more Aisha tried to push it aside, the more the thought gnawed at her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found herself in the servants' quarters, pretending to inspect the kitchen supplies. The older woman who had first mentioned the missing wife stood near the hearth, stirring a pot. Aisha hesitated before speaking. "Tell me about her." The woman stilled. "Who?" "The first wife," Aisha said, lowering her voice. "What really happened to her?" The woman sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "You shouldn't ask such questions." "But I am asking." The old woman glanced around, ensuring they were alone. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was like you. Young, beautiful, full of life. But she was not obedient. She did not accept her place." Aisha's breath caught. "What happened to her?" "No one knows," the woman murmured. "One night, she vanished. Some say she ran away. Others say she was never meant to leave." Aisha's skin prickled. "Are you saying—" "I am saying that not everything is as it seems." Fear coiled around her heart. She had always felt trapped, but now she felt something more dangerous, like a bird not only caged but watched. That night, She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The wooden bird Zion had given her rested beside her pillow, a painful reminder of the freedom she didn't have. She thought about her husband, his quiet authority, the way he never spoke of the past, the way the servants avoided mentioning his first wife. The thought chilled her. Was she truly safe here? Days passed, and Aisha became more observant. She noticed the way her husband always locked certain doors in the house, how the older servants averted their eyes when she asked about the past. The unease settled deeper into her bones. One evening, when her husband left for a business trip, she saw an opportunity. With careful steps, she made her way to the wing of the house that had always been forbidden to her. The hallway was darker, colder. She reached a door that had always remained locked, until now. Her hands trembled as she pushed it open. The room was untouched, dust settling on fine furniture. Dresses hung in the corner, shoes still placed neatly by the bedside. It was as if someone had expected the first wife to return at any moment. Her fingers brushed over a small wooden jewelry box on the table. When she lifted the lid, a folded letter lay inside. With shaking hands, she opened it. If anyone finds this, know that I did not leave by choice. I tried to escape, but he will never let me go. He would rather see me gone than free. Aisha's breath hitched. The ink had faded, but the meaning was clear. She staggered backward, her mind racing. Her husband had always been distant, quiet, but was there something darker beneath his silence? Had the first wife tried to flee and paid the price for it? A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding. A servant stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Aisha clutched the letter to her chest. "Did you know?" she whispered. The servant hesitated before nodding. "You must leave before it's too late." She shook her head. "If I run, he will find me. Not if you have help." Aisha's pulse raced. "Who would help me?" The servant's gaze was firm. "Zion." Hope flickered in her chest. She had spent so long believing she was alone, but now she saw it. There were those who had been watching, waiting. Her time was running out. She could not let history repeat itself. She had to escape. And this time, she would not be another forgotten wife lost to silence. Aisha's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her heart pounding against her ribs. The weight of its words pressed down on her, confirming what she had feared all along. Her husband was not just a cold man but a dangerous one. The fate of the first wife was clear, and if she stayed, she would meet the same end. The servant's voice pulled her back to reality. "You must act fast. The master will return by morning." Aisha nodded, her mind racing. Running wasn't just a choice anymore, it was survival. But escaping wouldn't be easy. The house was heavily guarded, and the walls that trapped her weren't just made of stone. If her husband suspected her disloyalty, he would make sure she never left. "Zion," she whispered. The servant nodded. "He's waiting for you." Aisha swallowed hard. She barely knew him, yet he was the only person willing to help. Her instincts told her to trust him, and in this moment, she had no other option. The servant led her through the darkened halls, moving swiftly and silently. Every creak of the floor, every distant voice, sent fear crawling up her spine. Her pulse quickened as they neared the back gate. "Go," the servant urged. "Run and don't look back." Aisha took a deep breath and stepped into the night. The cool air hit her skin like a shock, but she had no time to pause. The village lay beyond the fields, and if she could make it there without being seen, she had a chance. She moved quickly, her bare feet pressing against the damp earth. The silence of the night was her ally, but the darkness held dangers of its own. Every rustling leaf, every distant sound, felt like a threat. Then, she saw him. Zion stood near the market road, a horse waiting beside him. His expression was tense, his eyes scanning the shadows. When he spotted her, relief flashed across his face. "You made it," he murmured, offering his hand. Aisha hesitated for only a moment before taking it. "We don't have much time," he said. "We need to leave before they notice you're gone." She climbed onto the horse, gripping the saddle tightly as Zion mounted behind her. With a firm pull of the reins, they took off into the night. The wind whipped against her face as they rode, the village quickly disappearing behind them. She didn't dare look back. She had spent too long trapped in a life that wasn't hers, but now she was free. After what felt like an eternity, they slowed near the edge of a river. Zion helped her down, his expression unreadable. "Where will you go?" he asked. Aisha wrapped her arms around herself. She had no home, no family who would take her back. "I don't know," she admitted. He studied her for a long moment before saying, "There's a caravan leaving at dawn. They can take you far from here, somewhere safe." She nodded. "Thank you, Zion, for everything." He smiled slightly. "You deserve to choose your own life, Aisha." For the first time in years, she felt hope. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she turned toward her future, not as a wife bound by duty, but as a woman finally in control of her own fate. She had escaped more than just a house that felt like a prison. She had escaped a life that was never meant for her.